Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Bhagavatam. So today we're doing chapter 11 of book 5, and that is about Bharata, who was in a former lifetime the emperor of India, and then became a deer, and now is a retarded intellectual, a retarded brahmana who is just wandering around India disheveled and dirty, and gets, amongst the many adventures, gets enslaved by the king's troop to carry the king's palanquin, and then it gets the king upset because he's not carrying it well, because he's distracted from conventional things, and then gets into a conversation with the king after the king insults him and threatens his life. So, in this session, we're going to find out what regular people are into and what enlightened people are into. And let me explain why. We'll do a summary of this. Let me get this on the screen. So here's a summary of what we have in the 11th chapter. These are the different verses and with the main points. Reality is not easy to perceive because it's not what it seems to be. Intellect alone doesn't help you perceive reality. Only someone called a sadhu might perceive reality. So what's a sadhu? The third text says a sadhu is someone who realizes that perceptual pleasures are like dreams. And what does that have to do with perceiving reality? Because 4 explains attachment to things distorts our perception of them. So emotional biases distort the objective. Subjective biases distort objective observations. So the more extreme our subjective bias, the less accurate our objective perception. The mind is self-deceived by its own desire bias. And this is why, although capable, it doesn't perceive reality. The mind is capable of directly perceiving truth and reality and everything. But how come it doesn't? Because it deceives itself. Why does it deceive itself? Because of its feelings about the things, about the way it wants reality to be. Seven, the mind defines its own perception of reality, and that's why we say reality is a product of your imagination. So that was in the first 7 texts of the chapter, which we covered 2 live streams ago, which is 3 weeks ago because we skipped 1 week. Now, in the previous live stream, which was 2 weeks ago, we covered another group of texts, 8 through 12, I think. 8 says that the mental power, so he's talking about the mind and whether or not the mind can perceive reality. So how does the mind perceive anything? By using its mental powers. So in 8 he says the mental powers can be directed to external perception or not. This is one thing that we're not aware of. The mental powers can be directed to the external perceptions. In other words, the mind can connect to the senses to perceive the world, but it doesn't have to. This is the topic of today's discussion, is what is an enlightened person into? Conventionally, we are into whatever the mind plugs into. So the mind plugs into the perception of the world via the senses, but there is another option. It doesn't necessarily have to do that, or that's not the only thing it can do. And then the question of what else is there is a question that's postponed a little bit. That's what we'll cover today. But first he explains what the mental powers are. He says you have 11 mental powers. 5 powers of perception, 5 powers of action, and 1 power of self-identification. In the 10th text, he explains what they are. The powers of perception, the 5 powers of perception, are the powers to experience the 5 perceptions: scent, form, tactility, flavor, and sound. The powers of action are the powers that let you engage in the 5 categories of activity: elimination or destructive activity, sexuality or creative activity, locomotion, movement, changing your place, which is also kind of an evolutionary action, conversation, which is a mutual action or an exchanging action, and manipulation, which is a type of creation, but it's more building and refining and controlling. So those are the 5 powers of action. The mind has those 5 powers. That's why the body can do those things. The mind has these 5 powers of perception. That's why the eyes can perceive things. That's why the nose can perceive things. And then finally, there's the power of identity. What does that focus on? It dwells on the amalgam of these 10 powers, which is the body. The identity is based on the body, which is the amalgam of these 10 powers. Then in the 11th text, he said, there's these 11 powers of the mind, but there's an infinite number of experiences that you can have, because there's an almost infinite number of ways that you could combine these 11 things. And that's why many, many, many things arise in reality, even though they're based on 11 principles. Then in the 12th text, he says, consciousness as a living being identified by these combinations, which sometimes form and sometimes dissolve, is the witness of these powers and their combinations. So what is the consciousness is not a member of these 10 powers. This is where modern neuroscience is on a completely different page. Modern neuroscience assumes that consciousness is a result of neurochemical stuff. The way that your brain fires makes you conscious. Which, from the point of view of a sage, is like saying that that your computer is responsible for this YouTube stream. What you're watching right now, your computer is responsible for producing it. Isn't it? After all, if you damage the computer, the stream becomes damaged. If you break the computer screen, you can't see it. If you break the speakers, you can't hear it. If you disconnect it, you can't get the stream from YouTube. Hence, we conclude that the computer is producing the stream. But the sage says, yo, what about the guy, Victor Kara, making the stream? That's analogous to the whatever those guys are called, the neurological scientists. Their definition of consciousness is missing the content producer. So what Bharat is saying in the 12th text is that beyond these 11 mental powers, there's the power of consciousness. Consciousness is not a mental power. But consciousness is the observer of the interaction of the mental powers, called the kṣetrajña. The jña is the consciousness which observes the kṣetra, the field of things interchanging with each other. So now he says consciousness becomes something called a jiva, or a living being, because of identifying with the combinations of the 11 powers, identifying that body as the self. Even though that identification sometimes comes into being and sometimes goes out of being. It's born and then it dies. It's awake and it's asleep. It's unanesthetized and then it's anesthetized. It's moving and then it's in a coma. Its eyes are open, its eyes are shut. Even though that thing is temporarily coming in and out and being, the consciousness identifies with it and then becomes known as a jiva, which means an animated being. So now the computers become animated. YouTube is an animated thing because there's producers producing content for YouTube. If all of the content producers left YouTube, there would be nothing in YouTube. YouTube is merely the vehicle or the technique or the technology by which the content providers provide the content. Similarly, the mind, the body, the intellect, the whole neurological structure, everything is the technology by which the content provider provides the content. Or experiences the content, really, because it goes in both ways. The 5 powers of action are the providing of content, and the 5 powers of perception are the experiencing of the content. So that this is the last text that we covered 2 weeks ago, right? That consciousness is the observer of these mental powers and how they interact and change. And then he says there's two types of consciousness witnessing this, and this is a little complicated because it's two meanings at the same time. 2 types of consciousness witness this: the simple witness and the one who is entangled in it. The first is called the pure witness, and the later is called the impure witness. So Bharata says the real consciousness, the real conscious being, is the observer of this whole thing called jiva, a living being, which is a result of consciousness identifying. Consciousness identifying with the mind-body complex creates something we call a living being, which is born and then dies. And then he says there's 2 kinds of witnesses. One is just a witness, but the other believes themselves to be an actor within that. In other words, you can just witness the world, or you can witness the world as though you are a part of it. So the first type of observer is just a simple witness. Like if you witness a crime from your balcony in an apartment building, then you're a simple witness. But if you witness the crime as the victim or as the perpetrator or as a, what do they call those guys? Accessory, you're helping the perpetrator, you get involved in the crossfire or whatever as you go by, then you're not a pure witness because you're involved in the transformation that you're witnessing. Now you're an impure witness. Okay? So there's 2 kinds of consciousness is a witness of matter, mental and physical matter, in 2 ways. Either simply as a witness or as an involved witness. Now there's 2, so that describes 2 types of things, but there's another thing. There's one type of consciousness which is only a pure witness. It's always a pure witness. And there's one type of consciousness which can change from being an impure witness to being a pure witness. So bear that in mind too. Well, Lisa, that will be the answer. Your question, how to be a simple witness, is what will be answered. Okay, so now we come to some new material. Text 13. And this is where I get the title of today's session. The impure witness. The question being answered now in 13 is, the impure witness involves with the external energy. What does the pure witness involve in? Because if you're uninvolved, or is it just uninvolved with anything at all? Is it uninvolved with anything at all? That seems unlikely. How would anybody be satisfied by being uninvolved with anything? Of course I'm an impure witness. I'm witnessing you making a strawberry shortcake, and of course I want to taste it. What's the point of observing the strawberry shortcake without experiencing the taste of it and being influenced and moved by the taste of the strawberry shortcake? You're making music I'm the observer of it. What's the point of being the observer of it if I don't allow it to change me, to move me, to make me feel something, to motivate me? So are you saying that the impure witness is just somebody that listens to music but doesn't care about it? Somebody that watches strawberry shortcakes being baked but doesn't have any interest in eating them? Or is the pure witness involved somewhere or in something else? So, for example, if I'm watching Mario the baker make pizza, then I might not get distracted or concerned with the smell of strawberry shortcake. Because I'm already involved with the pizza. Even if I notice the smell of strawberry shortcake. So what we're going to find out is that the pure witness is something like that. The mind has to be involved in something. The mental powers and the consciousness has to be involved in something. But one's mental powers are absorbed in something extrinsic to itself, something superimposed on itself, and the others are absorbed in something else. Let's find out what. Kṣetrajña ātma puruṣaḥ purāṇaḥ sākṣāt svayaṁ jyotir ajaḥ pareśaḥ nārāyaṇo bhagavān vāsudevaḥ sva-māyayātmany avadhīyamānaḥ. The witness, the actual self, the ancient person, immediately self-luminous, uncreated, and the supreme master, the origin and all-attractive substrate of all beings, who locates himself within all individuals by his own power as their internal ruler. So, what does the witness, consciousness, witness to remain pure? It witnesses itself. So that's the first thing that it says. The kṣetrajña now becomes the kṣetrajña, the witnesser of the kṣetrajña. Ātmā, the witnesser of the self. Now, there's two types of self, as was hinted by the giving of the pure and the impure witness. There's two types of self. There's the self which is the fooled self, and there's the self which is the true self. We always witness ourself, but we always witness the fooled self, the superimposed self. But the pure witness is absorbed in witness of the true self. The true self is now going to be described puruṣaḥ. It's the actual active personal agent behind all the machinery. It's just like behind all the YouTube, there's actually PewDiePie as a person. There's actually Hikakim as a person. There's actually behind this Victor Kara's astrology channel, there's a guy named Victor Kara who has a life, who lives. The pure witness witnesses that conscious being directly. And purāṇaḥ, that's the original person, that's the ancient person, that's the person behind all these persons. The person behind all these persons that we've been, in all the lifetimes that we've been, is the person who the pure kṣetrajña witnesses, and who we should try to witness. Another quality is given, sākṣāt svayaṁ jyotir. Jyoti, you know, because everybody knows the word jyotish. Jyoti means light. So if some light comes on, then you can see something. That's the basic technology, really, behind the whole YouTube, is light. Sākṣāt svayaṁ jyotir. Svayaṁ jyotir means an illuminator. Illuminates itself. When you turn on a light bulb, what's the first thing that you see? The light bulb. The first thing that you see is the light. Do you need to turn on another light to see the first light? If you light a candle, your room is dark, you light a candle, now you can see your room. Do you need to light a second candle to be able to see the first candle? You don't have to light a second candle to see the first candle. The first candle illuminates itself. That's called svayaṁ jyotir. The moon, it reflects the light of the sun. That's not svayaṁ jyotir. That's param jyotir. The sun, however, is svayaṁ jyotir. That's why the sun has no phases. That's why the sun's always round. Because it illuminates itself. To whom? If I light a candle, the candle illuminates the room to whom? To me, the observer. Or to you, another observer. But this self is a jyoti, or a candle, or a light, that is also the witness. So sākṣāt means direct to itself. Svayaṁ jyotir means sākṣāt svayaṁ jyotir means this light illuminates to itself. So this conscious light, it can illuminate the room to me. I am the light. When I come into a dark room, I'm the light. My perception fills up the room and reveals the room to me. But the amazing thing is, the light doesn't just have to be shown onto the room that you occupy. The light of yourself can be illuminated upon yourself and illuminate yourself to yourself. Something maybe like looking into a mirror. So the kṣetrajña, it's a luminous being that emits light of consciousness, awareness, perception. And what does the pure kṣetrajña witness? It witnesses itself to itself. So it is an immediate, unmediated experiencer. Not mitigated by any technology, like now you're experiencing by technology. But if you were here, you wouldn't have a need for the technology. It would be immediate experience. Similarly, we experience the world through some apparatus that we're plugged into. Eyeballs, nostrils, and so forth. Internets, and all kinds of VPNs and all those things. Networks. This experience is not immediate. Therefore, it's affected by the quality of the technology that makes the connection. Karana-patava. The quality of the tool affects the perception. But for the pure observer, there's no technology in between the perception. It's a direct, unmediated perception of the self by the self. kṣetrajña ātma puruṣaḥ purāṇaḥ sākṣāt svayaṁ jyotir. Another quality is given ajaḥ. It's not produced by something else. It's not created or born. The witness is not produced by the firing of neural patterns. The witness is the thing which causes the firing of neural patterns and then observes them. Pareśaḥ. Pareśaḥ looks like it means paramātmā. But it's becoming clear actually right now. I translated it that way as if it means paramātmā. But actually it means pareśaḥ, means it has another master. And then the second half of the verse describes the master. So para means something else that you're dependent on, and ajaḥ means the controller. So this is very interesting. Here's a light which illuminates things to itself and is not created, yet is mastered or controlled by another light, by another being. So here you can bring an analogy of something like the sun. The sun is a super light, and it produces other lights. All the fire which burns is able to burn because of the energy invested in things by the sun. Or just simplify it to the sun rays. The sun rays are individualizable components of the sunlight. So those sun rays are like the different observers, the different conscious observers, you, me, the other person. And we're not created at any particular time. There's never a time when there's a sun without sunlight. So we're ajaḥ. However, although we're ajaḥ, we're still pareśaḥ, dependent upon some source of light. So here's where I said this, the idea of the pure knower and the impure knower has another dimension to it, which is that there's one knower who is always pure, and there's one knower which can be pure or impure. The one which is always pure is the source knower. So I'm saying the source of this knower is nārāyaṇo. Nārāyaṇa means the substrate, the ayana, the holder, the reference of all nara beings, all living things. And bhagavān is described as bhagavān. Bhagavān means the all-attractive one, the one who has potency. The potencies, the attractive potencies. Beauty, strength, and so forth. Vāsudevaḥ. Vāsudeva means the substrate for all vasu, for all being. The conscious being behind all the beings. Sva-māyayātmany, by his own power, ātmany, within the individual self, avadhīyamānaḥ, becomes the avadhīyamānaḥ, becomes the internal regulator, the internal controller, antaryami, becomes the inner bhartu, the inner sustainer. The sun is the inner sustainer of its sunlight, is it not? By its own power. Its own power is invested and is the essence of its sunlight. Hence the sun is the avadhīyamānaḥ, the internal regulator and controller of the sunlight. Similarly, the paramātmā is the avadhīyamānaḥ, or the power that is within the ātma, the individual ātma. Let's see if there's any questions. So, and I'll just reiterate this, give you a chance to write a question if you have one. The impure witness involves with the external energy. What does the pure witness involve in? It involves in the witness. The pure witness involves in the witness, which is the actual self, the ancient person, immediately self-luminous, uncreated, and this immediately self-luminous and uncreated, yet with the master. The origin and all attractive substrate of all beings, who locates himself within all individuals by his own power as their internal ruler. Okay, any question there? That's a nice statement, Stephanie. If there's any question that you guys recognize that I should have addressed, then let me know. Like, are there two types of consciousness existing together? So yes, they're not separable. They're not separable. So can you separate the sun from the sun ray? You can't. Why? Because the sun ray is the sun's essence extended. Or in astrology analogy, can you separate a navamsha of Aries from Aries? You shouldn't really, although we do. We collect them all in Vargas and separate them, actually, because we're dealing with this reality which is separated. But really the amsha of Taurus that's within Aries is different from the amsha of Taurus that's within another sign. And it is those degrees of Aries which is that amsha. So do the two types of consciousness exist together, inseparably together? So that's correct. Vana, the individual rays of Vishnu are us. Rikta says, why is the jivatma the impure witness? Because the jivatma is defined as jiva because it's a created being, because it identifies with the mental processes. You'll see him say later that it takes the linga of the manas. It takes the form of the manas, and it becomes indistinguishable from the manas because of witnessing the manas. The giant super fun Budgie Hotel asks, is Nārāyaṇo also another name meaning Surya? Yes. Because Surya is the source of everything that exists, right? The sun is the source of everything it created all the planets and everything within the planets. Vana, what is the purpose of feelings and emotions? Let us see. We'll see. The purpose of feelings and emotions. The purpose of consciousness is to experience what? Feelings and emotions. They motivate actions which the consciousness enjoys. The purpose of everything is enjoyment. The problem is if we're experiencing something which is unsteady, unconstant due to being unreal, then our emotions will be exhausting. So this is the point. The pure witness is not inert. The pure witness witnesses and becomes involved in its witnessing of itself and its relation to its master. The pure self is involved in and emotionally involved in and subjectively induced into its relationship between its true self and its master. Fortune from within asks, does each individual person have a pure observer or is it a collective consciousness? This is a very brilliant question. It's the same. Gosh, this is a very brilliant question. He's going to answer this question. Bharta is going to assume that Rahugana would have this exact question. And so he's going to answer it directly in a couple of texts. When challenging situations happen in life, how do we remember, connect, and love our pure witness? It doesn't matter if it's challenging or not challenging. Actually, the challenging situations are usually easier because that's when you are impelled to withdraw. When you have a challenging situation, if I identify as a person in a story, and then everything goes bad for that person in a story, then after a while I will feel like this is exhausting. I think I'm going to stop reading this story. But if I identify with the person in the story and everything goes great for the person in the story and it's exciting and interesting and they overcome all their challenges all the time, then I think this book is great. I'm going to keep reading this book. Did you ever notice that there's very few books that are written where the hero fails repeatedly? Because nobody keeps reading those books or stories. Nobody keeps listening to those stories. So actually, the situations in life which are challenging are easier, are better. This is why people like Kunti Maharani pray for them, or they welcome them. They're better because in those situations we think, God, isn't there some alternative to this story? Whereas when everything is going great and we're just on top of the world, and then we think, I love this story. I don't need an alternative to this story. So let's see what comes next. In the next text, that is a new question. This is your question. So this is your question. We know you by your name as from Fortune from Within. So Fortune from Within asks this very question. Is there a different paramātmā with each ātmā? Your answer is already supplied by the analogy of the sun and the sunlight. But let's see how he says and how he answers it. yathānilaḥ sthāvara-jaṅgamānām ātma-svarūpeṇa niviṣṭa īśet evaṁ paro bhagavān vāsudevaḥ kṣetrajña ātmedam anupraviṣṭaḥ. Just as air remains itself, although it goes inside and becomes all living and non-living things, similarly the supreme all-attractive substrate of all beings, as the pure witness, enters with the self into this world. So he says, take the example of air. The air that comes into this room has the shape of this room. And it has the smells of this room, and it carries the qualities and sounds and everything of this room, not the world outside, and not the next room. So it appears that this air in this room is this shape. But the air is the air, and it comes into any shape and takes any qualities from that shape, but remains the air. It keeps its own swarup, ātma-svarūpeṇa. It remains air, and it's the same air that's in the other room. Similarly, the supreme ātmā, the paramātmā, is one being. But with you in your room and with me in my room. Air comes into my body, and so it becomes a part of my nervous system and my blood source system and my blood cells, etc. And the same air goes into your body and becomes a part of your nervous system and circulatory system and all that stuff. But it doesn't cease to become air. It's still itself. It's still the same molecular construction within you and within me. Similarly, the super soul, the paramātmā, is one being, although looks totally different with you than with me. Yathānilaḥ sthāvara-jaṅgamānām ātmā. So just like air or prana goes into all the creatures, from trees to tigers to humans, but still ātma-svarūpeṇa niviṣṭa, it keeps itself like that. It keeps itself, and it remains air. In the same way, evaṁ paro bhagavān vāsudevaḥ, the supreme self, Bhagavan Vasudeva, kṣetrajña ātmedam, goes into the self of the witness. and also comes into this world prophylacticized by the self, by the impure witness. Or that might not be the most accurate. I would have to maybe put that on a scale and weigh it. Maybe the other way around. Okay, so let's see what we had here. The witness is the witness, the actual self, the ancient person, immediately self-luminous and uncreated, yet with a master, the origin and all-attractive substrate of all beings, who locates himself within all individuals by his own power as their internal ruler. So then the question is, if he locates within one being, does that change him into a different being? So are there many, many infinite numbers of paramātmas? And the answer is no, there's just one air, but it's inside everybody's body. In different ways, it's inside all different houses and rooms and buildings, but it's just one thing, it's air. Similarly, there's one paramātmā, that's the essence of all the things that exists. The next question is, when does the impure knower become a pure knower? Someone else asked this question earlier. Like, how can we become a pure knower? When does that happen? Nayavadetam tanubrid narendra vidhuyamayam vayunodayena vimukta sango jita shatsapatno vedatma tattvam brahmatiha tavat. There's a great term here, tanubrit, means body wearer. So that's the jiva. The jiva is a body wearer. Just like I'm a jacket wearer, the actual witness is a body wearer. This body wearer will wander, brahmati, here, iha. Will wander here in this perceptual world. Wander because it doesn't permanently manifest in any particular shape, because all of these interactions between the 11 mental powers keep transforming, keep changing. So we keep changing or wandering, brahmati. The body wearer wanders here until, yavat, until it truly knows its self-reality. Ātma means the reality of the self, the self-reality, the truth of the self, the true self. Veda ātma, knowledge of the true self. Until that time that it doesn't have knowledge of the true self, it wanders amongst imagined selves, superimposed selves. The body wearer will wander here until it knows its self-reality. How will it know its self-reality? It has to cast off delusions. Vidhuyamayam. And what happens when it casts off illusions or delusions? Delusions like, I'm the best basketball player. I'm the master musician. I'm the smartest. I'm the worst XYZ. I'm in the middle. I'm XYZ. All the different delusions about what I must be because of the observations that I'm having. When those delusions are cast off, at least suspend self-identification via external perception. Suspend that, and then what happens? Vayuna udaya. Something dawns, something rises, udaya. What rises? Vayuna. Vayuna is clarity, accuracy, truth. So if we can suspend self-identification via our perception, then some clarity will start to arise. From that clarity, vimukta sangha. From that feeling of attaining some clarity of self, will be willing to vimukta sangha, distance from the attachments. Sāṅga means the superimposition, the thing that's been attached to you. So, I'm a New Yorker defines my reality. I'm a Uttarashad native defines my reality. My moon is in Rohini defines my reality. These are observations that we've made. I behave in this way. I have these feelings, which is encapsulated by saying I'm Uttarashad, I'm Rohini. These guys are just sangis. They've been attached to the observer. If the observer is willing to suspend, oh my God, I look like I have Parkinson's. If the observer is willing to suspend the suspension of the self-definition by these upadhis, then some clarity can finally come inside the observer. And when that clarity comes in the observer might be willing to do this, which is called vimukta sangha. Removing the upadhi, removing the sāṅga, removing the thing which has been additioned to the self, superimposed to the self. And then it is described as jitta shat sapatno, and that's why he addressed him as Narendra, a king or a warrior. A king conquers jit. But the real king is the soul, and the real territory to conquer is its mental powers. Especially the powers for perceiving the world. So that's why there's 6 identified. The 6 are the 5 perception powers, and then the thing that they impact, which is the mind. It is those 5 perception powers and the mind driving them that makes this thing connect to this thing. Makes the perception connect to the observer. If we suspend that, get a dawn of clarity, remove that, then we've conquered the tendency for the perception to bind the thing to us, to bind the identity to us. Then we can get ātma-tattva. We can't expect to know who we are when we're busy misdefining ourselves. You see, a person that's blabbing all day long about something wrong, and they're wrong about it, and they keep blabbing about it, you can't explain to them that they're wrong, because they're blabbing. First they stop blabbing, open ears, then you can explain. So the ātma is constantly blabbing, I am black, I am white, I am male, I am female, I am Italian, I am German, I am blah blah blah, I am boo boo boo, I am BBB. Then no dawn can happen. But when it stops blabbing and says, what am I? Then some clarity might dawn. And then it can separate from all the things that it was just assuming that it is. Then it has an opportunity to get Vedatma Tattva, to understand itself. At that time, it can evolve from being an impure knower to a pure knower. The 16th continues. What's this? Can a moon nakshatra assist us as an observer to see clarity? Not really, but maybe. It's a question of how far down the maze are you. Most of us are so far down the maze that we are not even clear about what the upadhi or the false identity is. So we keep getting baffled by our own false identity. So for that person, it's very useful. And that person is 95% of society. 95% of us. So for such a person, it's pretty useful to finally realize, I understand how Rohini moon, Rohini Chitra, whatever it comes out to be in your list. I understand that's me. Now I have clarity about my false me. Then you can kind of graduate to, okay, I still understand the false me, but it still doesn't make much difference. I'm still not that being, and it still doesn't work. It will work much better when you understand the false you, because at least then you can have dharma with the false you. You can be consistent with the false you. That's better than being inconsistent with the false you. And from that platform, it's somewhat easier to realize that my problem isn't that I haven't identified my false me. My problem is that I haven't identified my real me. Until that time that we see, the poor person generally thinks, when I have money, I'll be happy, because I won't worry about paying all these bills, and I'll be able to just relax. So the poor person works really hard, steals, lies, cheats, or goes to school, bribes, or whatever the poor person does, or becomes excellent at something, or works really hard and starts a business, gets money, is not a poor person anymore. And then he thinks, now I'm a rich person, and I'm still not happy. So that's analogous to us thinking, God, I don't even know who I am. I'm not really one with my body. I'm not really one with my mind. That must be the reason why I'm not happy. So then we'll strive really hard to become one with the body, and to accept our identity, and to know who we truly are. And then we realize, okay, now I have achieved this, and I'm still dissatisfied. You're in a bit of a better situation then, because then you crossed off your list the possible things that you have to do. Well, I guess I know that it's not that I have to become rich to become happy. Maybe I have to become beautiful to become happy. Then we go and try that. Then we get beautiful. And then we're still not happy. Maybe I have to become smart to become happy. Then we go to school. And then we get smart, rich, and beautiful. Maybe I need power to be happy. Then you cross it all off your list, and then you'll finally come to the point of, what is the problem? The problem is that I have a false me. And it's based on things that constantly change. So can knowing your false you better via astrology and so forth, psychology, self-help, help? Yep, it can help. But it's not the ultimate solution. Yes. Oh, look, my hand gets cut off. When it goes to the right, that would be my right hand. I will rein in my hand so that it doesn't look weird. Okay, so now 16 continues on this topic of when and how does the impure knower become a pure knower. Yāvadhīyamānaḥ ātma-lingam. Samsara tat pa avapanam janasya yat sva-māyayātmanya raga lobha vairānubandham mamatam vidatte. It will wander here until it no longer sees the mind as itself. Yeah, if you're thinking that your tool is the artisan, it's going to be hard for you to produce really good art. Until it no longer sees the mind as itself, it will wander with the mind. For the mind's selfishness gives attachments that weave the being it creates into the pains of ever-changing existence. Regrets, confusions, impropriety, passion, greed, and finally enmity. This verse is pretty awesome. It has a lot of interesting things that it says. Basically, the basic statement is summed up in Nayavaretan-mana Atma-lingam. So linga is an important word. And the basic meaning of it is something that signifies something. The gender of a person is known by the linga. The shape of something is called its linga. So here he says the Atma linga, the shape or the definition or the symbol or the token of the self, is the mind. Mana Atma lingam. Mana Atma lingam. If the mind is taken as the indicator of the self, then you will not become a pure witness. You will remain an impure witness. Because the mind is not the self. The mind is just a mechanical tool that is influenced by the observations that come in through the perceptions and produces a sense of happiness or unhappiness in past, present, future, and all sorts of tenses and variations of happiness and unhappiness. So as long as we think that the ātmā is defined by the mind, then we will not really know the real self. Instead, we will exist in the mind's world, which is called samsara. Samsara is based on the word samsri, which means the things that flow as a result of something else, the constant pushing of one thing into another. So how the cycle of a cause to an effect, which becomes a cause of an effect, which becomes a cause of an effect, is samsara. The mind creates this stream of desires to experience its desired state. The mind's desired state is happiness. The mind wants to provide its user, consciousness, with happiness. That's what it's intended for. So it impels desires for the senses to experience things that will equate to happiness, so that the user will feel happy by observing it. This creates samsara. The desires will create effects, which will then become causes, which will then become effects, which will implicate us in a whole cycle of things. So he says it's samsara tapa. All the problems and pains involved in samsara. There was a cartoon that I saw once upon a time of a hippie on the beach. And in the other frame of the cartoon was, there was a hippie on the beach and there was a guy in a suit coming to the beach. The guy in the suit coming to the beach said, "Finally, I earned enough money and then grew my business that I could afford to take these kind of awesome vacations." And the hippie on the beach just looked at him. The guy, the business guy, going on a vacation to the Bahamas represents samsara. We're trying to achieve happiness. That's samsara tapa. We're taking so much trouble. In order to achieve happiness, we have to go to school, learn this, compromise with this person, subordinate ourselves to that person, humiliate ourselves in front of that person, do this for that, do this for that, do this for that, do that, do this, risk that, risk this, risk the other thing, not do this because we have to focus on it, sweat, don't sleep, don't this, don't this. Finally we made this money. Now we can go to the Bahamas. The hippie's just on the Bahamas. He's just there on the beach. The hippie represents the intrinsic happiness within the self. And the businessman represents the idea that we will get this happiness by working for it. That's samsara tapa. The pains of trying to achieve happiness, which are unnecessary pains. Which one is this? Avapana was an interesting word. It's like a seed, right? Yeah, to weave something together. So now Bharta is describing as the self gets sewn into something. Avapana, janasya. It gets woven into the struggles of this living being that it's become. And what comes along with those struggles? Shoka. Shoka means regret. Kings are often named Ashok. No regrets. Shoka means regret or sadness. Shoka or regret results in moha. Moha is confusion. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did I do this? Why didn't I do that? Shoka gives moha. Moha gives amaya. Amaya means mistake. Something unsound. So ill health is described as amaya. But in general, it just means something that isn't constituted correctly. It wasn't built right. So from confusion comes bad action. Confusion comes mistake. Mistake creates rag, attachment, but it's mistaken attachment. So, lamentation, confusion. Why do I have this feeling? Impropriety, the illness that results from it, the sickness, the depression that results from it. Then raga, the hope that something else will fix this. Then lobha comes next. By any means necessary, I must get that thing that will fix this. And then vaira. These other people are taking that thing from me. These other people have it. They're my enemy. I have enemies because I need something. The only reason we have any enemies is because we want something. If we didn't want anything, we would have no enemies. Enemies are the people that get in the way of us getting what we want, having what we want. This is the cycle of the tapa, or the pains that come from samsara. It begins with shok, and then it goes to moha, amaya, raga, lobha, vaira. And these things, anubandham, just keep binding you again and again and again. And they're all based upon mamata. Because the mind gives the mamata. Mamata is the sense of possessiveness or selfishness. Since I am this body, if we accept the mind as the linga of the self, if we accept the mind as the definition of the self, then we will definitely have mamata, because the mind is needy. Just like your computer needs electricity, your mind needs stuff. It's not svayaṁ jyoti. It's pareśaḥ. It's illuminated by other things. It's run by other things. It's inert. It has to be illuminated. So if we accept the mind as a self, then we have created ourself to be a dependent being. And if we're a dependent being, then we will need things. Mamata. And if we need things, then we're going to have enemies who also need those things. And we're going to have greeds, and we're going to have passions, and then we're going to have amaya, impropriety, which is going to lead to moha and shoka. So you can go forward from shoka or forward from vaira and get any kind of both meanings out of it. Any questions? There's one more text. Can we get out of the maze immediately if we end the identification with our perceptions, or do we have to go the purification process of burning off our karmas and need to go through more incarnations? You can get out of it immediately if you could immediately reject the mind as the ātma-linga, then you could get out of it immediately. I didn't want to really talk about this, but I guess I really did want to talk about this, but recently I got a surgery. So that's why I didn't do anything last week. And also this week I'm not really doing much because I'm still going back to the hospital for the stitches and all that stuff. And also my son moved. So anyway, last week I had surgery which required full anesthesia. This is the first time in my life that I ever had complete anesthesia. That was a harrowing experience for me. That was an earth-shattering experience from which one will never be the same in a positive way. But it wasn't easy. So why I'm mentioning this is to show how difficult it is to give up the ātma-linga, manasa ātma-linga. You can get injected by a chemical that will disconnect you from the mind. It's very easy. I had it happen to me last week. In fact, you don't even need a chemical to do it. Hopefully you do it every night. When you fully sleep without dreams. But because we do that every night, we're very used to it happening, so we don't notice it. But when I got put into this full anesthesia, I think two things happened. It was so deep. It was like deeper than I'm used to with sleep. And because I'm not used to that way of waking up, you know, like sometimes if you fall off your bicycle or something, you go into hyper-perception mode and you dilate time and you can experience moments very, very long scale per moment. So I had a very long scale perception where I could see details about each little stage of thing happening as I was coming out of the anesthesia. So it is actually quite easy to separate the self from the mind. As I said, it can happen to you from an anesthesiologist, or it can happen to you in your bed when you go to sleep. But you probably notice it more from your anesthesiologist. But you could notice it also when you wake up. What you'll notice is that although it is easy to separate the self from the mind, it's not easy to keep them separated. And that the self is tantalized or seduced or pulled by the perceptions back into accepting the ātma-linga as itself. So the question was, who asked this? Rikta asked, can we get out of this maze immediately? So the answer is yes. However, immediately you can dissociate from your identification with the mind. But what the experience of anesthesia proves is that an artificial separation of self to mind is not persistent. And what it proves is that it's actually pretty difficult to separate the self from its mind. So theoretically, liberation is immediately possible because all that you have to do is separate the self from the mind. but that is like a false advertising or misleading advertising, because the ability to separate the self from the mind is very difficult. So if you ask, since liberation is instantaneous, what is all this stuff that is going on with sadhana and people practicing and doing yoga and doing study and all that stuff for years and lifetimes? I thought liberation was instantaneous. Everything that the sadhana and the practice and the study and the evolution is all about is about coming to the stage where you are actually capable to actually cast off the definition of the mind as the self. So that's the long-winded answer to that question. So they talk about burning off karmas and so forth. It's because karma is the momentum. It's the momentum, and then it's also the tangible effects. For example, I have a wife and kids. They are waiting in the hospital room, in the surgery thing. So there's tangible effects of accepting the ātma-linga as the manas-linga as the ātma. So those tangible effects, they also will pull the self back into identification, back into its place, the same place that would produce the effects. So actually, it's very difficult to achieve liberation, and it takes many lifetimes of gradually becoming more and more careful and willing to do the things that will not force the self into identification with the ātma, with the mind. So now the final question is, how can we expedite this? Look at that. How can we expedite our evolution into a pure knower? So that's very related with this question. So you see how Bharata is actually either dealing with questions that Rahugana actually asked, but just the narrator is leaving out the questions, or just anticipating these questions, and it shows that they're natural questions because the people in the chat stream have the same questions at the same time. How can we expedite our evolution into a pure knower? Bhratrivyam enam tad adabhraviryam. Bhratrivyam enam tad adabhraviryam. Upekṣayadhyetitam apramatta. Guror haresh charano pa sanastra. Guror haresh charano pa sanastra. Jahi valikam svayaṁ ātma mosham. How can we expedite the evolution? He advises, become sober. Good idea. And fortify yourself by patient non-cooperation with this very powerful rival. Use the weapon of sitting at the feet of Hari Guru to become victorious over the deceptions that steal away your very own self. This is the final verse in the chapter. So he's first of all says apramatta. If you want to expedite your evolution into a pure knower, then his best advice is be apramatta, which is difficult to translate, but the translation that I like the best is sober. Matta means like very passionate, lusty, and wild. Pramatta means things that make you passionately lusty, wild, like intoxications. And apramatta means not like that. So it means sober. So he's talking about, sobriety, he's talking about sobriety. Sobriety has, just like the universe has so many different lokas, sobriety has many different lokas to it. It has many different contexts. Really, the only sober person is a samadarshi yogi. It's not a person who's successful at Alcoholics Anonymous, but on another level, the person successful at Alcoholics Anonymous is sober. And all of these levels of sobriety are advised. If you want to evolve into a pure witness, on what logic would you invest drugs? On what logic would you invest things which exaggerate the ātma-vikār, not the manas-vikār, which exaggerate the transformations of the mind and draw your attention to the transformations of the mind? My friends, that is what drugs do. They exaggerate and draw your attention to the transformations of the mind. We like that. The reason why we like that is also very interesting, but probably a discussion for a different day. But it's very deep, the reason why we like that. So under what logic would you, all the hippies and so forth that are like pro-drugs for self-realization is not the Vedic way. Don't think that Vedic people didn't have access to drugs. Drugs grow in plants. Everybody gets drugs. It's easy. It's not like you need modern pharmacy to make drugs. And they reject the drugs because the basic advice to a person who wants to become a pure witness rather than an impure witness is to be sober. And sobriety starts with literal sobriety. Not intoxicating the mind, exaggerating it, and encouraging the identification of the self with the experiences being presented by your drug-affected mind. So that's the first thing. Become sober and then fortify yourself. Fortify myself. Which one is it really? It's complicated words. Adhyadhitam. Get power. Empower yourself. Sober, empower. Sober up, empower. If you want to evolve more rapidly into a pure knower, get sober and then empower yourself. Empower yourself in relation to what? Empower yourself in relation to this object that you're dealing with. We're talking about whether or not the mind will steal and control our perceptive power. So first, don't tantalize the mind by insobriety. And second, empower yourself in relation to the mind. Currently, the mind is a dabravirya, an extremely powerful opponent. So if we want to evolve into somebody who can separate the mind from the self, then we have to empower the self to be at least equally powerful as the mind. So become sober and fortify yourself. How? Fortify yourself by upeksha. So upeksha is a very interesting word, and it's a very important word. Patient non-cooperation. Oh, I had it literally in the translation. Patient non-cooperation. Upeksha means to tolerate something. Upeksha also means to ignore something. So, when the mind says, "Oh, there's a pizza. I can smell it." If it's not time for you to eat, then you should fortify yourself. Become sober, fortify yourself. How? By upeksha of the manas. ignoring the stimulations of the mind. Ignoring the stimulations of the mind will weaken the mind. This is also, I remember doing therapy with my son. The therapist was bringing up this point that there's a loop, a behavioral loop involved. The more that you do something, the more that your amygdala, etc., believes that you need to do that thing to be safe. So the more that you can ignore the impulse to do that thing, the weaker the impulse to do that thing will become. So apparently that's a basic principle of behavioral psychology, which Bharata is explaining right here. The more that we ignore or disregard the mental impulses to action, the easier it will become to ignore them. And that's what we want to do, because we want to distance ourselves from its mind. Because we want to know the self without the mind, without subjectivity and without relativism, which is what the mind is composed of, subjectivity and relativism. So become sober, fortify yourself by patiently non-cooperating with this very powerful rival that will weaken the rival and strengthen the self. Then, now being strong, take a weapon, astra. What weapon? Upasana astra. This is a very interesting weapon. Brahmastra, varunastra, agnastra, upasanastra. What does upasana mean? Upa asana. What does asana mean? The place where you put your as. The place where you sit is asana. What does upasana mean? Sitting close. Upasana is what happens, Upanishad. Upasana is what happens when you sit close to something. You interact with it, but you're sitting close to it. So you're learning from it. That's what upasana implies. Charana upasana, sitting close to the feet, definitely implies learning from. Guru Hare. The Guru and Hari, what you get from the Guru and Hari. Guru and Hari. So the Guru and Hari, Vishnu, will give us information about the real self. That information about the real self is the weapon to use to cut kritika. Kritika is the astra, it's an axe. Now cut with the axe. Cut what? The identification between ātmā and manas. Jahi vyalikam svayaṁ. Why would I want, at that point, my personal reaction is timid and sympathetic. Probably because of a lot of Chitra and Rohini in my Manaslinga. It's along the lines of, but this Manas is my friend, and this Manas is not a bad guy. This Manas is a nice person. This Manas gave me so much happiness. And I mean, it gave me unhappiness too, but maybe it's because I misused it. Why will I cut it off? Why should I use an axe and a weapon against it? This is actually important, and this word bhratrivya is actually interesting in this regard. Bhratri means brother. But bhratravya means rival. So just like the third house The third house is about the siblings and the rivals, the competitors, the peers. It's all the same thing. So in Sanskrit, the word bhratrivya, it implies brothers or siblings, and it also implies rivals or enemies. The reason why he chose that particular word is because the mind is not actually evil. It's a brother to the self. It's a sibling to the self. But, so we don't want to destroy the mind. Just like it's not dharmic to kill your brother. You don't want to kill the mind. But we want to destroy we want to sever and destroy the self's utilization of the mind as the basis for its identity. Why? Because if the mind is allowed to function in the role of the thing that defines who we are, then that mind is not a brother, it's an enemy, partrivya, in the sense of an enemy. If the mind is not the thing which defines what we are, then it's partrivya in the sense of a brother or sibling. And if we allow it to function in the role of the thing that defines our identity, then it is actually vyalika. It's a liar. It's a cheater. It's a spy. It's a deceiver. My hand is going off screen, sorry. And this is like 1980s Indian television shows. So become victorious over the deception. And this mind is svayaṁ ātma mosha. Mosha means to plunder. This mind has stolen the most valuable thing, the self. So here we are thinking, this is my brother, this is my sister, this is my sibling. But this sibling is out of control. And has stolen our very self and replaced it with some conditional, temporary definition of the self. Don't be lenient towards it. Cut its ability to define who you are. Regain the treasure of what you really are. How? By patiently, soberly tolerating its blab. Not telling it shut up, not killing it, just tolerate it. By tolerating it, it gets more and more quiet because it sees it as less and less of an effect. Then you can as it gets more and more quiet, then this ability, the strength of the glue that it's using to bind you weakens. Then the increase of the strength of the weapon that you get from Hari Guru, information of who the true self really is, can chop that off. Okay. That's what we have for today. Any last questions? Nomadic Sun says, grateful for this profound teaching, Vic. I wish that I was on your side of the YouTube so that I could be hearing this. But I hope that it's clear to you also that I am on your side of this YouTube, because I'm hearing this from Bhagavatam and I'm reporting it to you. So don't think that this is the profound teachings of Vic Dekara. Or isn't Vic great? It's the profound teaching of Bharat to Rahugana, explained by Shuka in Srimad Unfortunately, maybe I'm one of the few people that's talking about that. So I could take that credit. Very good. So King Collins is always grateful for Bhag with him. All right, guys. So I will get off here. I have a sadhu moon. I don't know what that means. Thank you, everybody.